I want to talk about some topics, and I am so thankful that that's worked out so well. You know, that so many people want to discuss things. I had a little bit of a, if you may be in the wrong room if you came here for a budget meeting. I already expressed my displeasure that they decided without telling me that they were going to have a budget meeting right next door, because the budget's important, but to not talk to us about that it's conflicting with this perturbed me a bit. And I had 6, 7 people tell me that they felt like they really were sad that they were going to miss Science Sunday, but they were going to go to the budget meeting because it was an important thing. And I understand that. So I just want to make sure we're not halfway through this and somebody says, "Oh, I thought this was a budget meeting." I mentioned a couple times ago about the oceanographic work being done, and Carl's going to lead us off, but I wanted to give a minute or so to Jeanette to talk about her niece who's involved in things. Scott, I don't think I didn't turn the microphone on. This is kind of the fun of science right here. It's a little bit chaotic. And it's really, that's part of the fun of the Science Slam.
Part of the budget cut.
Yeah, they took our, yeah,
Okay. Good morning, I'm Janine, and I just want to give you a quick update on a research cruise that my niece just took. She's an oceanographer and a full professor at the University of Rhode Island. And just real quickly, I'll tell you what they did. She said, our cruise went from Bermuda to Rhode Island, and we are trying to understand how the nutrients in the ocean shape the community of phytoplankton and their physiological responses. We were sampling natural communities in the water using a water sampling device that is attached to a cable that transmits to a shipboard computer. As this device goes down, it tells us what things like temperature and salinity are doing, and it also shows us fluorescence from chlorophyll, which can help us figure out where the phytoplankton live in the lit ocean. On the way up, we stop the water sampling rosette and send a signal down to the cable to the rosette, which releases a trigger. This closes the bottle and captures the water and biology in it at the depths we want to sample. The rosette is brought back on board the ship, and there are nipples on it that let us drain the water out. My lab filters the water and uses DNA-based sequencing methods to identify the organisms in the water in the samples we bring back to the lab. We also use methods to look at which genes the phytoplankton turn on under different conditions. We also collect large volumes of natural water and the biological communities to put in clear carboys that are maintained on decorative incubators at ambient temperature through a flowing seawater system. We use these incubators as it allows us to do experiments such as adding a particular nutrient and then asking how the biology responds under these different conditions. We are doing this work so that we can better understand the plant life that helps the ocean take up carbon. Phytoplankton are responsible for half of all the carbon fixed on the planet, and that feeds the marine food web. As the ocean responds to climate change, it is expected to get warmer, and the surface ocean will be more stratified from the deep ocean. The deep ocean is a source of nutrients to organisms living in the surface ocean. So if the oceans get more stratified, it is predicted that they will become more stressed for nutrients required for life. So our next cruise is going to be in August, taking off from the coast, the Northwest Pacific coast, and that one's sponsored by NASA. So I'll let you know what she finds out. Thank you.
great. And I would imagine that everyone here would agree that if she is ever in the area, we will have
She's going to come hopefully next autumn and talk to us. Hopefully.
open invitation at any time. So yeah, that sounds great. That whole women in science thing is really, really interesting to me, you know, and I think that's great. I also like to always make a point when we have young scientists that come here. So what's your name again? Josh has come here to hear about science topics, and that's a great, great thing, you know, that we're looking at the world and looking at it with young eyes and experienced eyes, we'll call them, and it's great to see young people involved. In the back, what's your name?
Keenan.
Keenan? Okay, welcome. Thanks for coming. You have interest in science?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, good. Well, hopefully we touch a few interesting topics that make you think about it in new and different ways too. So, with no further ado, we just got to keep moving here, and that's fun and a little chaotic, but I'm really excited about today. So we'll start with Carl Nash talking about red-winged blackbirds. Do you have the clicker?
Yeah, I got the clicker.
Okay,
And
good.
do I point it at this? Or we're in the back?
Good. I think you just click it and it ought to go.
Okay, all right.
And also, if anybody needs it, I have a pointer too.
I think, yeah, there's one here.
And this one is maybe, if you touch the middle one. So if you need this.
Okay, good. Good morning, I'm Carl Nash, and I'm going to talk about RWBBs, or more commonly known as redwings or red-winged blackbirds. One of the things I'm going to talk about is territory, and Gary Larson. I really miss Gary Larson, but he really captures a lot of things about nature in a cartoon, and I only changed one word, actually name, when I rewrote that. Okay. I'm going to come back. Let's see. Why watch birds? I'm not going to mention much here, except that birding is for everyone. It's not just that little old lady driving a 20-year-old Volvo. Today it's for bankers. It's for yuppies. It's for everyone. There's just a lot there. There's different levels of birding. You don't even need to know the birds in your backyard. You can just enjoy the behavior. You can list birds and get a challenge by listing as many species as you can. By studying bird behavior, why is this bird biting the back of a predator? And then there's scientific observation, but anybody can get something out of birds by just enjoying or watching birds. Back to red-winged blackbirds. The male is about the size of a robin. I'm sure everybody's seen them. It's totally black, except that it has red epaulets with a yellow streak below. The female is about the same size, has brown streaks down her breast, and a white eye stripe with a brown cap. And if you get it in the very right sunlight, you see a red or pink splash on the throat. The breeding cycle, the female will build a cup-shaped nest in the reeds of a marsh, and the nest is typically 1 to 8 inches above the water level. She'll lay 3 to 4 eggs that are bluish-green and marked with dark colors. She will occasionally have 3 broods per season, although usually 2 broods per season. And the season lasts from March through September. The female will incubate the eggs, although both the male and the female share responsibilities for tending to the young. The young are attritial, which means that when they come out of the egg, they need some help. They cannot live on their own. There's many shorebirds that are able to live within hours. They grow their down fluff feathers very quickly, and they're able to feed on their own, and they're able to walk on their own. Red-winged blackbirds are not able to do that. It takes about 2 weeks for red-winged blackbirds to get up to speed and to be able to fly. Insects are the primary food, although red-winged blackbirds will also eat seeds. Red-winged blackbird is the most common bird in North America. There have been 200 million of them in terms of estimates, although now it might be 100 to 175 million birds. They nest all over the continent, all the way from Alaska to Central America and from California up to Newfoundland. They're also one of the most studied birds. There's over 700, well over 700 studies that have been done on red-winged blackbirds. And in fact, there were 349 studies done just between 1971 and 1980. And 75 students, more than 75 students have completed master's thesis or PhD thesis based on red-winged behavior. Well, why study redwings? It's cheap. You only need a pair of binoculars. They're easy to watch. You only need to go up to the edge of the marsh and be able to observe the birds. You don't need to be confused by watching birds up in the treetops. They're just very accessible. And there's also much to learn, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The ideal territory for a red-winged blackbird is in a marsh with cattails. They do nest in the woods or the edges of woods occasionally, but they really prefer the marsh with cattails. And as the Gary Larson cartoon captured, the birds will live on a piece of property that's 60 feet square. It's very, very precisely defined, just as precisely defined as our own neighborhoods. Ideally, we'll have a tree in the center of it that the birds can sing from. The male will get up there and help define his territory by his Booker T song. He'll puff out his epaulets and his wings, and he'll sing his Booker T song and threaten other birds. The territory is established by the males. The males arrive around March 1st, and the females arrive around mid-March. Now, one of the important things is that red-winged blackbirds know they come back to the same property every year. They were here last year and probably here the year before that. They don't change properties. So they know their neighbors because their neighbor was there as well last year on this very same edge. So when the neighbors return, they don't take much fussing to be able to remember where their boundaries are. They pretty much know where the boundaries are. It's when a new bird comes of age, an old bird dies and a new bird will move in. He does not know the property boundaries, so it takes a certain amount of fussing and squawking by the current neighbors to be able to make him understand where the property boundaries are. The males will arrive around March 1st, and the females will arrive several weeks later. And the females will start searching where they want to live. And one thing about this, the red-winged blackbird, is that they are a polygamous species, so that the females will move into the property or the territory of 60 foot on a side, and so the males try to attract an entire harem of females. And usually there's 5 or more females living on a particular property, sometimes up to 15 females living on his particular property. I'm going to step aside for a minute and just talk about evolution, reproduction and evolution. The differences in reproductive success are regarded as the engines that drive natural selection. Well-adapted creatures are those that live long lives, they have many young, they have many offspring, and they're therefore able to pass on their genes successfully to future generations. Less favored creatures are eaten by predators, or they're driven from the prime territory, or they can't get enough mates, or they can't find a mate to be able to pass their genes on. Their genes die with them. So, in terms of red-winged blackbirds, who gets the females? Who gets to perpetuate the species? Who gets to pass down the genes to the future? Is it the size of the male? Is it the most aggressive male? Is it the best singing abilities with his Booker T song, puffing out his brightest epaulets? Or is it the best territory? Or is it all of the above? Pretty smart crowd. So how does evolution suggest the progress of the red-winged blackbirds? All of the above, scientists have seen different behaviors and drawn different conclusions. But the preponderance of the evidence seems to suggest that it's the quality of the territory. I don't know, pretty smart females moving into trying to search out the best place to raise a family. Could it be the best males? Well, probably not, because we know that the red-winged blackbirds live in their own property. The males live there for their entire lives. It's when a young bird comes of age The young bird can move into the penthouse, which is a little further out in the marsh, that's more secure from predators. Or that young bird can move into the slums, which are right on the edge of the marsh, which might be more accessible by predators. So it's probably not the best male who has the best piece of property. I'm just going to, but thanks to our intimate knowledge of redwings, we know that they mess around a lot. Consider this report from a biologist named Maurice Giltz, who studied redwings in Ohio. On 3 occasions, around 4 o'clock in early May, I observed bright pink to red-breasted females gather in a group as they flew over an alfalfa field of 40 acres. These females flew to an adjacent old field beside a woodlot with brush and last year's growth of weeds emerging from puddles of water up to 80 square yards in size. The males in the area followed the females to the puddles and bathed with the females. They were all alternating bathing and copulating, the whole group of the birds, the males jumping from one female to another, and all of them alternating in and out of the water. I concluded that promiscuity was random. I cite another Colorado study where there were a number of males on their property who were basically given an avian vasectomy, and they were sterile, they could not father the young. But nevertheless, the females on that property were able to build a nest, lay eggs, and successfully hatch the eggs and successfully raise the brood. Sort of makes you wonder what happened to family values. Most students of red-winged behavior are looking for evidence of sexual selection. The concept is that over many generations, a mate seeks a partner with certain characteristics. And then the consistency of this preference is then spread throughout the entire population. And for example, the female peahen chooses a male peacock with the best tail display. So as we've seen with the behaviors of the red-winged blackbird, it's unclear how sexual selection is shown in the red-winged blackbird population. After thousands of hours of careful red-wing observation, apparently solid conclusions are regularly overturned by new evidence. Yesterday's hypothesis falls apart with new evidence, and maybe is the answer to every question. And the question of sexual selection in redwings is still under discussion. So in terms of interest in biology or biology behavior of birds, there's still a lot of knowledge that we could gain. So I'll see you at the marsh. Bring your lawn chairs.
Next question. Carl, at the beginning you said there were 200 million,
Right.
and you said maybe 150 million now. Why the decrease?
A lot of marsh, a lot of habitat loss throughout the United States and North America. And a lot of marshes are being filled in by farming, agricultural practices, or just basically marshland around are being developed for industrial purposes.
Okay. Maybe we can't do the questions, we gotta keep going. How better can you, I don't know if all my segues will work this well, but if you're gonna talk about birds, the next best thing to talk about after that is Schrodinger's cat. It's pulled up on the screen. Yes.
So Carl, I'm Mike Albro, and I'm a retired scientist from Fenhair. Can I ask you a question with multiple choice? I've got a question with one choice. Is an electron... Oh, go full screen, can you go full screen? Thank you. Is it got a laser pointer? Is an electron a particle or a wave?
There's a pointer on, there's a,
Yes.
Mike, there's a pointer.
There's a pointer on here.
No, there's a pointer on the podium. A little
Oh,
bit.
this one, okay.
No, that's
That's the bell. Yeah, I was trying this. Middle one. Middle one, oh, thank you, okay. Yeah, that's right. Yes is the answer. Next question. Is light a wave, Or particles?
Yes.
Yes. Right. So, mysterious, quantum mechanics, mysterious. Is Schrodinger's cat dead or alive? Or a superposition of both?
No.
Dead. Sure. Cats don't live for 80 years, right? But you see a lot of stuff in popular science writing and so on about this. There's a book here by John Gibbon, Search of Schrodinger's Cat. And in the 1930s, there were different schools of physics, and the Copenhagen school they thought that the important thing is measurement and observation. And if you don't measure and observe something, you can't talk about it. And they had this idea, which is, I think, a crazy idea. And in fact, Schrödinger himself pointed this out as how crazy their interpretation of quantum mechanics was. And the idea is, suppose you have a radioactive source which has a 50% probability of decay in a certain time. It could be 5 minutes, whatever. But you stop at the time of 50% probability of decay, and it's a random thing. You don't know if it's decayed or not. But then, if it has decayed, it triggers a Geiger counter, which triggers a hammer that breaks a phial of prussic acid in a box in which there is a cat, and it was live to start with. The question is it live or dead after the time elapsed? And the Copenhagen people were saying, well, it's a superposition of live and dead states until somebody opens the box and looks in, and then it becomes live or dead because you've observed it, you know. And this is weird, isn't it? It's also ridiculous. So, now, here is a little story about me. This is me when I was a kid, about 10 or so. And when I was 12 or 13, my dad had a luminous watch, one of the radium ones, with radium and zinc sulfide, that would glow in the dark. Now, it was really, so I borrowed this, or maybe he gave it to me, but I went under bedclothes in the dark, and I looked at it with a magnifying glass, and I could see little sparkles. And each sparkle is an alpha particle coming from a radium that's decayed randomly, and causes zinc sulfide to give a little flash of light. And I could see them. So I was sort of seeing alpha particles, not the ones themselves, but the little flashes they make. Now, you know, and then this was like what happened in Manchester, where I did my PhD 100 years ago. No, I wasn't there 100 years ago, but Rutherford and Geiger were there, and they counted these sparkles of alpha particles after a dark adapted eye, looking at a screen in which they had a radioactive source of alpha particles and a foil of metal, and looking at how the alpha particles scattered by the foil. And to their surprise, they found that some were scattered through big angles, which was very strange to them, because if the atom was sort of a blob, a uniform blob, they would go more or less straight through. So Rutherford said there must be a really small, tiny, dense spot in the middle of the atom, which is, of course, the nucleus. That's how the nucleus was discovered. But the idea that, you know, if I wasn't looking at this radioactive watch, you wouldn't have these little alpha particle sparkles is ridiculous. But that was a sort of conclusion of the Copenhagen school. There's a book called The Quantum Story by Jim Baggett. I'm going to quote him. He's talking about this period in the late 30s. And he said, this was the thought: classical objects cannot form superpositions in the way that quantum objects can, but there remain no clues as to the precise origin and mechanism of this collapse of the wave function. Things were waves until they became particles. It was just supposed to happen. The community of physicists had, in any case, moved on and probably had little appetite for endless philosophical challenges that, in the view of the majority, had already been satisfactorily addressed by Bohr, the Copenhagen school. Now, but I'm not a realist, and so was Einstein. Schrödinger was a realist. He put the story out to show how unreal this Copenhagen interpretation was, that only measurements or observations count. And sometimes even consciousness is needed, okay? Now, first, define consciousness, you know? For the first billion or so years after the Big Bang, probably there was no life or consciousness observers at all. But tritium decayed, it's got a half-life of 12.5 years, and stars evolved anyway. They didn't need observers or consciousness to observe, unless you have it's up there observing the universe. But the universe didn't split into two at every event. There's a many worlds hypothesis, which is also crazy, that says that whenever a quantum decision takes, the universe splits in two and goes on and on. Quantum mechanics is something weird, but it's not ridiculous. And, you know, thinking and consciousness are not either or. Now, we have a nice talk on biology, and here, honeybee and cat and bird. These, I believe, they all have some form of consciousness, but we can't know what it's like to be a bird or a bee. And then also forms of thinking and observing. So, are these observers? How do you define consciousness? It gradually evolved, surely, that's certainly my opinion. Now, coming to particle physics, so this is a picture of a collision of proton and antiproton that happened at CERN in a project called UA1, which I was involved in, discovered W and Z particles. And what the detector was called a drift chamber. It's a box of gas with thousands of wires at high voltage. And when a particle with charge goes through the gas, it ionizes the gas as it goes through the gas and makes ionized atoms along its path. And all these little dots you see here are actually the result of an avalanche of ionization caused by the electron making a cascade, amplifying it, a signal on the wire, recorded on the tape, magnetic tape, entry in the histogram. I mean, we only looked at a few of these events. Most of them just went in the histogram. Here, by the way, is a famous event because there's a very straight track here, which is a high momentum electron communicating with W as one of it's really a string of ionized atoms that you'll see. We say, oh, we see an electron, but of course you see the string of ionized atoms. So what happens is that in a gas, a charged particle goes through, and as it goes through, it ionizes some of the atoms, kicking an electron out, and that can kick another one out, and you get a string of these ions along the passage of the charged particle, and that enables you to reconstruct the tracks you saw on this picture. And then you're more familiar with bubble chambers. So here's the bubble chamber picture. So you have this liquid that's almost boiling, but not quite. It's usually cold, cryogenic liquid, and no bubbles in it because it's just not quite boiling. But when a charged particle goes through, or charged particles in here, these are electrons traveling. What they do is they ionize the liquid. And bubbles form because they just boil along the track. So here you see this part of the picture magnified, and here you can see the individual bubbles. Atoms are millions of times smaller than these bubbles. But what's happened is the atom is, of course, broken up into an electron and an ion, and then is amplified by making a bubble. Now, the key thing, in my opinion, is that this is a jump in entropy. So what is entropy? It's a hard concept perhaps, but here's a cup falling, breaking up, and what's happened is that a simple state has become many possible findings. There are so many ways the cup can break, right? What started as a simple thing can break up many ways. In the same thing when an atom is ionized, there's so many ways it can happen. The electron can come out in all different directions. So we use the word S, the symbol S for entropy. It jumps. How many ways are there to break? And this defines an arrow of time called the entropic arrow of time. You don't see the reverse happening, reforming itself. There are other arrows of time, like the psychological arrow. How is it related to the entropy arrow? But here's a view of this radioactive element causing a Geiger counter. If in one half-life, if it decayed, it triggers a Geiger counter, triggers a switch, breaks the valve of arsenic or prussic acid or whatever, releases the poison and kills the cat. And the Copenhagen was saying that the cat is only killed if an observer looks at it. But if it doesn't decay, nothing drastic happens. But my point is that at every stage, entropy jumps. The atom could have been ionized in many ways. The Geiger counter could have, when that happens, it's amplification. This amplification, all these things make a bigger and bigger thing. And you can't go back, because at every stage there's a jump in entropy, and going back is not possible. So when this happens, the cat is going to be dead. Sorry for the cat, but it's going to be dead. Okay? And, okay, I define entropy. It's the logarithm, a constant called Boltzmann's constant, times the number, it's the only equation in the talk, the number of possible states allowed by laws, like conservation of energy and momentum. And so the entropy jumps when the cup breaks and when the atom is ionized. It's not a local thing, it's defined for a system. The wave function is not local either. Now, so this is about what's called wave function collapse. And, commonly theorists say, Mike, don't talk to me about wave function collapse. just start and calculate, Feynman said, because we can calculate in quantum mechanics very well. And Feynman also said no one really understands quantum mechanics, which is true. I'm not claiming I do understand that, but what I'm saying is that don't talk to me about consciousness or observers or measurements. Talk to me about entropy jump. Theorists can calculate, procedures to calculate with real high precision without understanding these fundamental issues. An example is the muon, a little particle heavy with the electron. It's got a magnetic moment, it's a little spinning magnet. In theory, we can calculate the magnetic moment in certain units very precisely with this uncertainty in theoretical calculations. And at Birmingham, we're doing an experiment to measure this even more precisely because there's a discrepancy with the previous measurements from the theory, you know, in this last decimal place. So we have this ring at Birmingham that was brought, magnet was brought from Brookhaven, called the G-2 project. So I'm not claiming to understand quantum mechanics. I'm saying that don't talk about conscious observation or measurement, talk about entropy jump, and accept that wave function collapse actually is space-like is the technical term. That means it happens faster than a light signal can propagate without violating special relativity. So this was a confusion too, because special relativity actually talks about particles with mass or energy going faster than the speed of light and forbidding it. But that doesn't, in my opinion, invalidate the possibility that influence can travel superluminally past the speed of light. So, and that's, so another thing I put here, but people often say quantum mechanics applies to small, tiny things like particles, or small systems, but classical mechanics for big systems like cats. Actually, quantum mechanics can operate over large distances. It's not the size of the system that counts, it's the simplicity of the system. A cat or a cup are very complicated systems, and photons are very simple. So you can have two photons that sort of entangle far apart. And my message is that consciousness, measurements, and observation can have nothing to do with wave function. It means I'm a realist, if you like. And if you want more, there's a YouTube talk I gave at the Birmingham Philosophical Society about this, which is a very informal sort of talk. But thank you.
Earlier on in the presentation, you said that W in that equation represented, I think it was the number of possible outcomes for something.
Yes, right.
Wouldn't that technically be an undefined variable then? Because there's
But it's a very good question, but it is. Okay, so the question was, I gave a symbol W for the number of possible final states of a system. And the question is that defined? And it is actually defined quantum mechanically. Let's take a simple case I like to take is...
Please stay on the mic.
Sorry, yeah. A simple case, think of a neutron. A neutron is an unstable particle. It decays on average about every 15 minutes. And it decays to three particles, a proton, an electron, and a neutrino, right? So three particles come out, and they can come out in so many different directions and with different momentum, as long as it conserves energy and momentum. But there are a countable number of possible ways it can decay. And you can count the number of possible ways because every little element of space, can think of it as a cube, it's called a phase-space element. And that's to do with Planck constant. So it is countable, but it's a very large number. So it's a very large number, like trillions, whatever, but even the logarithm of that is quite a large number. So the neutron is sitting there in a box. A single state, entropy is very low. But when it decays, entropy is huge suddenly. And that's when, I say, the wave function collapses. Okay.
Thank you.
Good question.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right. Always interesting. I don't know how to segue from that. We'll bring Joanne, and maybe she's got an idea.
I bow to Mike's expertise instantly. Last week a fellow was talking about how energy went into a black hole and how the black holes evolved so that information disappeared as the black hole did. And I thought it was a very interesting one, and if I study it for another 3, 4, 5 decades, I'll understand that half-hour talk. My talk is very simple today. 3 topics. The Gaia, rediscovering a new organ in the human body, and visually evoked responses. Gaia, which is the European Space Agency, the satellite out there, looking at the number of stars, cataloging them as to where they are, what they're doing, how they're moving, so that we get an idea of what's going on. And because I can't explain it, I will let him explain it.
Is it black hole?
It's black energy.
Dark energy.
Dark energy.
Yeah. I think the video didn't,
You didn't load?
yeah. Is it on YouTube?
Better yet, I've got it on my
Here's the line, science and technology.
I was just thinking this could be a presentation in and of itself.
While they're figuring that out, I'd have thought, everyone knows about the conservation of energy, and is it ever possible to drop something and have it bounce higher than the level you started it from? Can you, what kind of concept can you think of? What kind of way can you think that something would be dropped and bounce higher than it started from? Chris and
There
Ben?
would have to be something that you bounce along that would have energy that would bounce back up higher than it was before.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so.
In here?
Take like, say, a baseball or something, drop it, but have at the last second, just as it's about to like hit the ground, have like a thruster or something pop out so that like, take more energy.
Okay, all right. Greg and Bat?
If there's some potential energy stored either in the object being dropped or in what it hits. For example, if there's a spring, or if you take a pen, a click pen, and you drop it, it actually spring up higher if you release that spring.
Okay, all right. Joe?
Possibly an anti-gravitational environment?
Okay, all right, in space or something like that, yeah. How about on the second bounce? Can it bounce to a level and then on the second bounce higher than it bounced on the first level?
Yeah.
Think about that one for a minute. We're going to go back with Joanne, but I just wanted to toss that topic out.
drop the ball on the ball. Is it loading up?
No, I'm just gonna play it directly.
Okay.
Released the first batch of data showing the brightness and position of all those stars, many of them within our own galaxy, but they're also able to see beyond. With this amazing spacecraft, your space agency has built with the help of Airbus and Stevenage and many other British companies too, to assemble this camera with over 1 billion pixels. And that is a measure of the accuracy of this thing, and that's why they can see with such phenomenal detail. Now, I'm joined by the UK principal investigator based in Cambridge. This is Professor Jerry Gilmore. Jerry, I mean, this is a big deal for you, isn't it?
Oh yes, it's the culmination of 25 years of hard work and excitement and anticipation. Today the revolution begins.
So what can you see?
Well, the whole sky, as you say, at a much higher resolution and precision than we've ever seen before, so we know what's up there. But most importantly with Gaia, the key thing about Gaia, it tells us where stuff is, not just something that you see on the sky, but how far away it is. And so, as part of the release today, there are accurate distances and motion speeds for 20 million stars. For 2 million stars, sorry. That's 20 times more than we've ever had before.
But the stars always look like they're static, but in fact they're moving. We're all moving at quite a lick through space.
Yes, exactly. They look static because they're so far away, and because they're so far away, it's actually hard to know how far away they really are. And so it's the ultimate precision machine Gaia was required to solve.
But this is really important, because with that data you can tell what?
We can tell where the stars are and how they're moving, and from that where they came from. So the basic question we're asking is, where did the Milky Way come from? What holds it together? Why is it the shape it is? Why is it moving the way it is? Why does the sun move the way it does? The next big question we ask is, well, what about all the other stars? Where did they come from? How many of those have got planets around them? Are they interesting planets that we could then go and look at and discover whether or not that they go green in summer and white in winter and that sort of thing? And then the next big thing about that is once we can got stuff moving, we can weigh things. And that tells us what's really there, not just what we can see.
Yeah, you're actually going to be able to weigh the Milky Way.
Yes, we are going to weigh the Milky Way very accurately. And in fact, each little piece of the Milky Way separately, and that's the key. Because we know that there is this mysterious dark matter. We know there's more of that than there is of anything else in the universe. But we've got no idea what else it is. But whatever the stuff is, it's reality, and we just froth on the coffee.
Jerry, thank you very much indeed. I mean, there's so much data now coming down from Gaia, so far away, 1.5 million kilometres away its position. They hope this is going to possibly extend to a 10-year mission, and over that time, you can only imagine the kind of a picture they're going to build.
Thomas, fascinating. Many thanks. Thomas Moore.
So Gaia is presently measured 1.2 billion stars in our galaxy. Now, there's 400 billion stars out there, so this could be a long-range project. But still, weighing the galaxy. How much does the Milky Way weigh? Love that? There's a new organ, not a Steinway or anything like that, but a new organ in the human body. Actually, it's been rediscovered. This is called, go back up. This is called the mesentery. And if you ever wondered why your guts don't just jiggle around all over the place, this is why. This is the lining of the abdominal cavity. It attaches to the intestinal wall and holds everything in place. And this was originally considered by Leonardo in some of his drawings, saying, well, what, Dad? They thought it was just various pieces hanging in there together. But with continuous study, we discovered, hey, there's a thingy in there holding us together. With a better understanding of this, we're going to actually be better off in terms of surgery. I mean, if we ignore an entire organ and just sort of slice it up, it's going to take longer. Now that we know that it's there, we'll be able to change things. So, a really big advance in medicine. Now, this is a cool one. Visually evoked auditory response. There will be no sound here. Can you hear it?
Can they really do that when we're not looking?
When nobody's looking. Now, I can hear this. I hear a very low frequency thump, like somebody taking a huge rock and dumped it on the ground. That thump. I can also feel it. When I'm looking at it, I have a compression wave hitting me in the middle of the chest. Dave Clark, Scott's friend, other half, husband. He feels the pressure wave in his chest. He doesn't hear it. So this is a new form of synesthesia. So it's a confusion of the senses. My eyes say there's a thump, and I can hear it. There are several others out there like that, and we're beginning to explore this new visual auditory connection. But if you ever actually see this in real life, stop drinking.
Thank you. All right. Did I say you were next, Greg? Or Mark?
It doesn't matter. I think
Let's-
Mark's doing next.
Let's have Mark do. He's our high school physics retired physics teacher in the group, and last year he amazed us with a really interesting procedure with the two glasses. Remember, one glass on top of the other, and they were both filled with water, and the water didn't leak out between the gaps in the two glasses. But how do you get the water out of the glass with, without touching the glass. That was his demonstration last year, so that was so popular. I was doing it at work for my guys at work and stuff, and they were all pretty amazed too, so it's fun stuff. So let's set the table up.
Okay, I'm not Mr. Science, but I do have a master's degree in science education. And so...
Mark, are you going to use the mic?
No, I'm not going to use the mic. So,
There's a lot of people with hearing loss in this room, that's all I'm saying.
yes, I do like the lights on. Yeah.
So if it's synesthesia, if you can see them, maybe you can hear them.
So I told Mike that I would do a couple of party tricks, but I lied. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to talk to you about climate. And so I'm passing out these papers, and on the papers I'm going to give you an opportunity to fill one out if you want, if you choose to, at the end of my presentation. If you feel at the end of my presentation that you would like your congressman to do something about climate, then fill one out if you haven't. If you don't want to fill one out, that's fine. Don't worry. I won't think any less of you than I already do.
So that's important.
Oh, and don't fill it out till after if you choose to fill it out.
If anyone needs a pen, I can.
All right, so first of all, a lot of people don't realize that because of climate change, things are getting warmer, pencils are changing to rubber, and people just aren't aware of this problem. That pencils are changing to rubber because it's so warm. Matter of fact, I talked to one gentleman, and he said, "Gee, Mark, I was against climate change, but that's so cool. Maybe I'm not." Okay, so here we have. We have here is we have the ocean, water, the ocean. And so we're going to put the ocean in the cup. And you probably know that the ocean is an ecosystem, and ocean has a balance in this ecosystem, and we try to maintain that balance. And as we do things to the ocean, we can upset it a little bit, but it can restore its balance, so it can come back. But if we keep pushing it by putting more acid in it and other things in it, then it becomes more unbalanced, and then it becomes more difficult to maintain it. And then eventually we could really test it by putting a lot of stuff in it. And then it could be more, and then we could go crazy. All sorts of crazy stuff. And have this water going all over the place. But luckily, if we're very careful, there's still hope. And we might be able to recover the ocean. We might be able to. If we're careful, we might be able to. And so hopefully we'll be able to do that.
Do that using the microphone?
Sorry. The Earth has been influenced by man. So here we have the Earth, and you can see that it's been affected by man. And as we affect the Earth, we put pressure on it. So as we add more carbon to the atmosphere, we stress it. But again, it's an ecosystem, and so it can adjust. So if we stress the Earth a little bit, it can adjust and it can come back to where it used to be. Right? So we can adjust. But if we stress it more, then it becomes more difficult, but it'll take longer, but it'll come back to its normal status. And we stress it a whole bunch. Oops. If we stress it a whole bunch, it'll take a lot longer for it to come back. But it can still, but it doesn't come all the way back. So if we put too much stress on the Earth, it won't come all the way back to where it was before, and that'll become a problem for us in the future. So, in summary, what we need to do is we need to make some realizations. We need to realize that there is a problem. So, I need your help here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do three things. The three things are, one, that climate change is real. So that's the first thing. And if we believe that climate change is real, then we should be able to get the little guy to move the most. Okay, so I want you to say with me, real. Okay? So say real. 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 Excellent. Good work. Good work. All right, that's excellent. Now, the second thing is that we need to believe that the problem is us. Okay? So you gotta stay with me, us. Okay, ready? That's gonna be the middle one, right? Us. 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 Oh, that's amazing. Excellent. Good work. You guys are doing great. Okay? And the last thing is, because one of the greatest problems is apathy, we have to believe that there's hope. Okay, so there are solutions. I'm a member of Citizens Climate Lobby, and we offer possible solutions. So the last one is hope. Okay, ready? All right, so hope, 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 hope. Oh my gosh, you did it! Good job. Sure. So the first one is just a principle of inertia. Objects in motion want to stay in straight line motion. And so when you're spinning it around, if you spin it fast enough, then the tendency to try to go straight will keep it from coming out of the cup. So that's the first one. The second one, this is a little can. I used to do this demonstration when I was introducing torque to my students. And so what I do is I tell the kids that I can talk to cans. And I would tell them, okay, so slow down, come back, and the can would do what I told it to do. And so I said, I'll work with any can. And the kids would go, come on, Mr. L. By this time they say, you're nuts. And I say, okay, well let's go out in the hall. So we go out in the hallway, I line up against the hallway, and then I take a big, big can, and I say, okay, slow down, come back, and they would come back. Then I'd say, work with any can, and I'd have a pop can, and I'd say, look, there's a pop can, slow down, come back. And then a kid would inevitably say, hey, Mr. Ellis, there's a pop can on that pop machine, what about that one? And I go, well, we're about out of time. Come on, Mr. Ellis. I said, there's only a couple minutes, the bell's gonna ring. And they go, come on. I said, well, maybe if we have time. And I go into the pop machine, I get the can. I said, I don't think we're gonna have time, the bell's gonna ring. They go, come on. I go, okay, come on, slow down, come back, it came back. And then the bell would ring. Of course, the can was planted. So the can has a rubber band in it, and it has a weight, and the weight's in the middle. And so what happens is as the can rolls, the weight keeps the rubber band from turning, and so it twists up. And so as it twists up, then it untwists so it can back. And if you go too far, then the weight can flip over, and then it won't come back as far. That's that. And finally, the nuts hanging from the string is a property of a pendulum. It's resonance. And so each one of them are different lengths. So I don't know if you noticed the first one we did was sort of shorter. We said that it's a problem, right? We said it shortly. The last one was said more slowly. So even if I could have a student who didn't even know how to do it and hold it, I said, just hold it steady, but when the nut is moving toward your head, just nod toward it, and that the slightest motion at the right frequency will get that one to move the most. So you don't have to try very hard, you just have to you're going to have the slightest motion at the right frequency, and you reinforce the natural frequency of that one. That
Pretty exciting. Nice. Greg, Spawn, follow that.
Parlor trick? Okay.
Do you have slides?
Yes, I have slides. Okay, so while we're getting slide up, my parlor trick is out on my service to students.
What's the name of your presentation? Great. Oh, great. I got it.
Greg's AlphaGo presentation.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly, very briefly, about AI. Okay, so, sorry, I need to use mic.
Thank you.
Okay, artificial intelligence. So there's different flavors of it. I'm not going to go into all of them, but some of them are knowledge-based, where you basically get experts to put all their data into this system, and then it organizes it, and you can have quick searches of it and get it out, and it seems to be intelligent. There's also logic-based systems, but the one I want to talk about is the neural networks. A neural network system is a bit different from traditional computer programs because it doesn't follow an algorithm, a step of structured programming. What it does is it basically learns. You have nodes inside, virtual nodes inside the computer that are connected, and you feed it patterns, and you give it the results of that pattern, and you do this over and over again, and it learns on its own without you having to tell the rules of the system. So, where's my clicker? Is this the clicker?
Yep.
Yes. That advances, yes.
Okay, so in 1985, a computer program called Deep Blue was developed by IBM, and it beat the world champion Garry Kasparov in a chess match. That system used, it did, I think 200 million calculations, evaluated 200 million positions per second on the chessboard. So basically what that did is it said, okay, if I make this move, what's the worst that my opponent can do? And then what can I do to respond? And we all do this when we play games of strategy. We think, oh, if I do this, my opponent might do this, then what can I do to do this? And you can keep track of a few layers. Well, this program was, a computer actually, was written so that it could do 200,000 evaluations per second. So it could look very deep and then see, okay, if I make this move, it will be the best. Now that option is available in chess because in chess, if you think about it, your first move in chess, there are, 10 pieces that can move, 2 possible positions for each piece. So there's only 20 possible moves you can start off playing chess. Now that number can grow, it will increase and will decrease as chess pieces are lost. But in chess, it's only having 20 options per turn, you can do that kind of tree. There's a more ancient game of Go. Go was developed in China about 2,500 years ago. It's the same idea. You have 2 players, opponents. Well, this is just an old picture of it. Here's a game board after it's been playing. At the beginning of the game, there's no stones on the board. If the play goes 2 players, black and white stones, one at a time, you place a stone on the board. There's a 19 by 19 grid, so that means that if you take into account symmetry, there's about 90 different moves you can start off with the first player. The second player has 100-something moves. The number of moves because of symmetry, so the number of plays you can make is huge, way too big to use an algorithm like they did with that chess game. Right? The chess game, they had to look at all possibilities. With Go, there are just too many. There's too many. The objective of the game of Go is to capture territory. This is well into the game, obviously, and I'm not a Go player. I've tried to play some. It's difficult, and I think if you're not playing somebody who knows how to play, it's it's very confusing because you don't know if you're doing well or not. You play for a while and you say, I don't know if I'm doing good or not, and you'd have to play for a long time before you can figure it out. So something very different was needed to learn how to play Go in a computer. So Google had a project called DeepMind, where they developed a computer program to play Go. And they invited, in 2015, October, they invited this man, Fan Hui. I think I'm pronouncing his name right. Actually, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. What? Fan Hui. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's it, I'm sure. That's this guy here. And he agreed to play their AlphaGo machine. AlphaGo was the name of the system. And he's the three-time European champion. And he agreed to play. He said, yeah, okay, I'll play. But the idea that Go is so complicated that they said, we're decades, and it wasn't just him, the whole community said, we're decades away from developing a computer that can beat a Go master. And like I said, he's a three-time champion in Europe. So he played, and the computer won all 5 games, beat him 5-0. Amazing. He couldn't believe it. What the computer program had done is they fed it thousands, maybe millions of games of Go, and it learned how to play Go by feeding in these games and telling the outputs. And so he actually joined the team, the AlphaGo team, to further develop this thing. This was in October of 2015. They issued an invitation to the current world champion, Lee Sedol. He was the Go champion of the world, a 17-time international champion. This guy was like the Michael Jordan of Go. He was amazing. They ranked Go players in I think Dan's or Don's. Fan Hui was Dan 2. Lee Sedol was Dan 9, which is the highest level. He was only 33 years old. And here's a picture of him. Only 33 years old, but the guy's amazing. He did amazing things with Go. Go is one of those games that is so complicated that there's whole philosophies around it. People build their lives around and look at life around in terms of Go. You can read about it. The philosophies are awesome. That is why people thought that computers weren't going to be able to beat people, because it's so intuitive. There's so much feeling in the game. There's so many options. How can a computer possibly do this? But they did it. 5 months, after 5 more months, first of all, Lee Sedol looked at the games that played against Fan Hui and said, oh, I can beat this guy. I can beat this computer. It's not going to be a problem. I'll win 5-0, maybe 4-1. You always play 5 games in these competitions. He said confidently, and the whole Go community was saying the same thing. Oh yeah, Lee's going to destroy the computer. So in March of 2016, the AlphaGo program played millions of games of Go against itself. And in that 5 months, it improved. And they warned Lee that they improved. He said, yeah, okay, we got this. Okay, so game 1, the computer won. It amazed everybody. The whole community was like going, what is going on? The computer beat Lee Sedol, which was absolutely amazing and unexpected. In game 2, well into the game, the computer played a move that everybody looked at and said, what? Why did the computer play that move? It makes no sense. No human would do this. Fan Hui said, no human would play that move. It is beautiful, is what Fan Hui said about it. They looked at it and they said, oh, well, it looks like a mistake, but we'll see. And it turns out that was the key, that was a pivotal play in the rest of the game. The rest of the game going, and Lee Sedol was never able to recover from that one particular move. In that one move, the computer changed the game of Go. Because it did something that no human would have done. And yes, the computer won game 2. Game 3 was critical because Lee Sedol was saying, okay, I'm the world champion Go player and I can't beat this computer. If I'm going to win this tournament, I have to win the next 3 games. So the pressure was on, not only for him himself, but also as a Korean, he was playing, in his career, he played for himself, he played for Korea, but now he felt like he was playing for humanity. So he was, a lot of anxiety and stuff, and he lost the third game also. So then he said, okay, I've got to beat this thing. I know I can beat this thing. There's something I can do. So in the fourth game, Lee used a different strategy. It was more of an all or nothing strategy. Not normally you play it in Go because it's very risky. Like you either win big or lose big. But he used that technique on the pro in the game, in the competition. And in that competition, it was going well. It was interesting. All of a sudden, the computer, AlphaGo, started making weird, ridiculous moves. I'm like going, well, what's going on here? Why is it playing this way? It turns out that the computer saw in its analysis, or had not seen this type of game before, so it didn't know what to do, so it started making ridiculous moves, and it actually lost. So Lee Sedol beat him in Game 4. Game 5, yeah. By the way, this idea of that he's playing for humanity, well, humanity also developed that program, that AlphaGo program, so anyway. But at Game 5, the computer came back and beat Lee Sedol. So at the end of the tournament, the computer beat the world master 4-1, upsetting the whole community and changing the game of Go forever. So, one more, real quick. There's a new version, they came up with a new version of AlphaGo called AlphaGo Zero. Zero because it played no games against people. It played against itself. It started with making random moves. It didn't know how to play it. All it knew was the simple rules, and it just played, made random moves. I can look my notes for this. After 7 hours, it was able to play a basic game a beginner's game of Go. After 19 hours, it had mastered the fundamentals of advanced Go playing. After 70 hours to play, it played at superhuman level. This AlphaGo Zero did not play against real people. It just randomly played. And it is now, it beat everything else. And it beat the AlphaGo Lee version, which they call it now. It beat that 100 games to 0. So AlphaGo Zero without, oh, sorry, you had to do another picture. Oh, there's a picture of Lee Sedol playing AlphaGo in that tournament. And this is the lead guy of the Google DeepMind. But the AlphaGo Zero is surpassed all other versions of this game, and it was one that grew itself. It played only itself. So amazing what AI can do. It learns. Okay, thank you.
Let's see. I wanted, do you see the Carl Sagan's blue dot?
Yeah, okay.
Earth received what some people call its sweetest Valentine on February 14th of 1990. So it's quite a while back, when a very famous picture, this planet's most distant traveler at the time, the Voyager 1 spacecraft, looked back from a point past the orbit of Neptune and took one last picture of home. You finding that?
No, I turned the projector off to load something, and now I can't get it back on.
Okay. How many people are familiar with that picture, the pale blue dot picture? There's a streak of sunlight and then a pale blue dot, which is our home. And probably the most famous thing associated with that is Carl Sagan wrote a story, put it in his book, wrote a book about it and talked about it. He's involved with search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And
there it is, Mike.
yeah. And it's hard to see, actually. Yeah. Can you see it? Yeah. Right there. Circle around that. There's a pale blue dot, and that's Earth from beyond the orbit of Neptune. In this famous photograph, Earth is just a pale blue dot. Carl Sagan would later write, everything that makes our world so wonderful. And he is, if you haven't heard it, you should go on YouTube and just Google Carl Sagan's pale blue dot and listen to him speak it. Scott Thompson did it once for us here in Carl Sagan's voice, and it was moving. It's vast oceans, its breathable atmosphere is represented by a single azure pixel on a field of impenetrable black. But if Voyager had taken this photograph 3 billion years ago, the dot would have looked entirely different. That's according to research from NASA Goddard astrobiologist Giada Arney. During an era, there's science right here, there's an ant running across the screen. Wants to grab the microphone. It's coming right up to the tip of the microphone. If you hear
something to say.
During an era known as the Archean, from 4 billion to 2.5 billion years ago, photosynthetic organisms had not yet taken over the Earth, filling the atmosphere with oxygen. Instead, the planet was probably shrouded in a haze of organic molecules that scattered orange light, making our planet at that time would show up as pale apricot. In fact, if evolution had taken a different turn, our planet might have become lilac instead of blue. Research suggests that many organisms in Earth's history, in Earth's early oceans, relied on a purple pigment for photosynthesis, rather than green chlorophyll. It appears that chlorophyll-based photosynthesis was more efficient since green plants have taken over the planet since that time and dominate. But the descendants of those plum-colored organisms can still be found in places where oxygen is scarce, like certain salty lakes, or the murky bottom of your flower vase at home that you haven't taken the flowers out of for quite a while. You can see those same organisms still develop. So, weird side note beyond that too, most of the light emitted by the sun is actually in the blue-green part of the electromagnetic spectrum, right? The blue-green light from the sun, that's what we see at times 2 here. But chlorophyll reflects rather than absorbs. So why do plants reflect most of the sunlight that comes to them? It may be a form of protection, preventing fragile compounds in the plant from being broken down by too much energy. The pale orange and blue dots don't just represent what was or what could have been, they are a testament to what might still be elsewhere in the universe. In the next 10 years only, scientists studying exoplanets, faraway planets, will gain access to telescopes capable of picking out the pinprick of a planet amid the glare of its star. The images they capture will look much like the photograph from Voyager, just a single pixel of light in the middle of all that darkness. But the color of that light will say a lot to these telescopes. The exoplanets that scientists eventually see might glow orange, like early Earth, or purple, like the Earth that might have been. Or maybe they use another photosynthetic pigment entirely. Researchers can imagine a world orbiting a faint sun on which every photon of light is precious. This planet might host plants that absorb every wavelength of visible light. And if you absorb every wavelength of visible light that's possible from a star that's so much farther away, you don't want to be green because you'll be reflecting a lot of it. So the plants in that case might be dark. Their leaves would be black. And interestingly, such plants do exist on Earth, like the black-leafed Ophiagon planiscapus. Scientists can learn even more about an exoplanet by separating its light out into its component parts, a technique called spectroscopy. The molecules in an atmosphere absorb light at different signature wavelengths, and researchers can determine the composition of a body by seeking out those gaps in its spectrum. For example, had Voyager conducted spectroscopy on its image of Earth, it would have found the hallmarks of water vapor and ozone. By looking at species taken by satellites in orbit around Earth, scientists are also able to tell that the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is definitely increasing. For a cautionary tale about what happens to a planet with too much carbon dioxide, you need only look at the pale yellow dot of Venus. That world's CO2 and sulfuric acid atmosphere traps heat, giving the planet a hellish average temperature of 850 degrees Fahrenheit. It's fun to consider all the colorful possibilities, but each one makes me even more grateful that I live on this pale blue dot. Okay, good. Jamie? You have a, what's your title?
It's just as moral development.
Yeah,
And that is it. That's the
What's the name of your presentation?
It's moral development. I'm from the squishy side of science.
all right.
I want, after all the nice hard science we've been having, I take a very different point of view of things. My background is in cognitive studies, and I've spent a lot of time learning about how people learn and how they behave based on that learning experiences. And this week, I got really annoyed because the press keeps pounding on lack of moral leadership in Washington. And the fact is, we have very powerful moral leadership in Washington, but most of us don't understand how it works. And so I wanted to introduce the idea of moral development and give you another way of thinking about how people are thinking and acting in Washington. Lawrence Kohlberg developed the taxonomy of moral development, which is a 6-level explanation of how we grow morally. But what I want you to think about it as I want you to think of it as a slope, and actually it's a very slippery slope. The first stages of moral development happen in very early childhood, from birth through about age 5 or so. These first 2 stages have a real strong biological imperative. They are necessary to keep the child alive. An infant has to be selfish. It has to be self-serving. And it has to do everything in its power to get what it needs to stay alive. So you see that in the first stage, simply trying to exist, grabbing everything it can. In the later stage, in the preschool years, children start learning the rules of the game. But this is a very interesting period because children also start to do what we call lying. But from the child's point of view, it isn't a lie. Children at that age don't differentiate between reality and fiction, so the story they tell you is actually a reflection of what they wish had really happened. So the kid with the icing all over his face can look at you straight in the eye and say the dog ate the cupcake. And absolutely, totally believe it. And that's okay, because they're just learning the dynamics of what the truth is, what reality is, and this ant is still visiting us.
It's developing its moral character.
I think it's got a strong moral imperative here. The second stage is the elementary school years. This stage is the stage where children are learning to fit into a social organism, into social relationships. So they start learning to play by rules. They start learning to understand what rules are about. And this is the age when you hear kids saying things like, but that's not the way you're supposed to do it. They play games that have rules. They play games that they bend the rules purposely. They rewrite the rules purposely. So stages 3 and 4 are based, stage 3 really is based on a lot of feedback and reward. Stage 4 is where they're really beginning to take control over the notion of rules. And this is the stage at which society really functions. We perk along at level 4 day to day. Now, at this point, I had said it was a slippery slope. It is. Stress, duress can push people back into lower levels of moral functioning very easily. We can regress to more primitive moral behavior when we are under extreme circumstances. But when our founding fathers wrote our Constitution, they were looking for us primarily to function at level 4. So society is not really it's not really astroscience of morality. It is school-age stuff. But our founders also, and most of Western society, also aspired to higher levels of moral functioning. And these are what are called the principled levels. The first is taking into consideration the larger society, and these should be the rule makers. The people who can think about the larger good and write the rules for everyone to live by and themselves on a day-to-day basis. And finally, the level 6 is the level at which people function when you hear them say things like a moral outrage, where it so defies their principles of belief that they become angry about something that is wrong, or they become thoroughly committed to something they see as right. And many of us reach these stages, but we can't stay there all the time. To get along day to day, we have to go back to level 4, and that makes good sense. These are very energy-consuming levels of moral functioning. So anyway, I just wanted to introduce these to you because we have not a lack of moral leadership in Washington, but we have a lack of moral content. And we see that in things like increases in hate crimes. And when we go back, that's where we're functioning. And Rex Tillerson had it right. He said that if we don't change the way we approach governance, we're going to lose democracy. And democracy requires us to be beyond these primitive levels of moral development. And this isn't a political speech, but I wanted to point it out to you because I think it helps us understand what's happening around us and what's happening in our society, and that it introduces another way of understanding what's going on around us. So any questions? Yes?
Is it based in any way or connected to neurological activity that's identifiable?
I would assume that there is. When Kohlberg developed this theory, it was long enough ago we didn't have a way of looking at neural functioning the way we do now. And I just put this together at a real last minute because I was so annoyed at the press. So I didn't really go into any of the newer studies that are being done, any of the neurological studies that are being done. But we know very well that neurological behavior changes as children mature. And I'm sure that there's a connection here because while I can't go into it now, there's a whole lot of different ways of looking at human thought and the development of human thought, and they all have a pattern of getting more and more sophisticated as the individual matures, and that has got to have some biological origins in it, there's without a doubt. Yes?
Well, let's say someone is behaving, let's say an adult is behaving at the pre-moral level. How would you get that individual to go to the levels where democracy is safe? And of course, I'm thinking of someone, I won't mention his name, but how do you get that individual into a higher level?
Well, there are a couple things to consider there. One is, did that person ever reach that higher level in the first place and backslide because of duress in the surrounding environment? If it's a backslide, then what you can do is you can remove the stress factors. And removing the stress factors in a person's life will help them function at a higher level. But they have to have reached that higher level in the first place. And that's the trick about the slope. Not everybody climbs up it. It is very slippery and very dangerous. And if you don't have a good moral background to support you on your way up that slope, you're never going to get there. And if it's who we're thinking of, I saw films of his upbringing, and there was no chance of moral development in that setting because the setting was so psychologically destructive. And yeah, that we can't fix at this stage of the game.
Great, thank you. We're running way over our time, and there was somebody that sent something to Scott.
It's on the screen there.
Okay, good. And this kind of came up quickly and unexpectedly, but we'll try to squeeze it in. I know we're running way over time. This is always one of my most favorite Science Sundays to hear all these topics. Kira, is it?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. And after that, feel free to go. I do have a couple other topics that I won't be squeezing in, but I did start talking about the conservation of energy issue too. I'll be free to talk to anyone about that.
Thank you for squeezing me in. Has anyone heard of transhumanism before? Oh, sorry. Has anyone heard of transhumanism before? Please raise your hand. Thanks. That's actually a little more than I was expecting. Well, for the others, I'll introduce it. It is a movement that explores the human condition and seeks to improve it through the means of present and anticipated future technologies. It is a pledge to create opportunities for overcoming fundamental human limitations, extending lifespan, elimination of susceptibilities to disease, and the enhancement of intellectual and physical capabilities. It's a post-biological renaissance. Consider the idea that your body is a vessel that can be re-engineered. Consider the idea that there are people working very hard at the 2045 initiative, Nectome and others, to see that there will be a day where your mind could be uploaded to an avatar in virtual space. This is considered the singularity where man and machine merge. Who are the explorers of this biological terra incognita? This is a very interdisciplinary space. They include biohackers, electronics hobbyists, neuroscientists, machine learning and artificial intelligence engineers, university researchers, tech entrepreneurs, and the list continues. There was actually a transhumanist candidate this last presidential election. I'll jump right into some research areas actively being developed to support this movement. The first one, first I'll say, I want you to rethink the body as a hackable organic electrochemical machine. You're seeing this. So, thank you. The first one's brain-computer interfaces. What is it? In the words of inventor Elon Musk, a necessity to keep humans from becoming obsolete when the singularity hits. BCIs are a conduit between the brain and the software that it controls. They provide the ability to sense, control, and communicate with the outside world via the power of thought. Applications include handless control of a drone, mouse cursor, or robotic prosthetic. How does it work? To hack the body you're sitting in, you need to understand a few truths about its functions. Higher level cognitive functions, as well as lower level muscle movements, rely on electrochemical signals. There needs to be a direct link to the brain to pick up these signals. However, your brain has over 100 billion neurons. As it's true that each neuron produces an individual signal, the signals themselves interact and ping off of surfaces within the skull, generating a lot of noise. This makes it incredibly difficult to segregate the intended signal from artifacts. What you want, and naturally one of the hardest challenges in BCI design, is achieving a high signal-to-noise ratio. Two ways of achieving this are, one, considering the proximity of the electrode to the origin signal. Non-invasive electrodes placed on the outer portion of the skull will have more noise and therefore more intensive signal processing needed than a near-direct content to the source of the signal, such as a neural lace. This is a scaffold that sits on the contours of the brain. Though invasive, spatial and temporal resolution are higher. The second is utilizing machine learning and training sets that can help adapt the BCI to a specific user by incorporating their EEG calibration data. This space has a lot of attention, but needs more momentum in decoding signals and machine learning algorithms and artificial intelligence, depending on the paradigm. There's a lot of potential untapped. The second is transcranial direct current stimulation. What happens when you electrocute your brain? Has anyone wondered about trying that? TDCS runs an electric current through a specified region of the user's brain. This method of stimulation improves neuroplasticity by depolarizing neurons or allowing them to fire more easily. Basically, you're eliciting an action potential. When paired with training, TDCS allows the brain to effectively create, strengthen, and organize neuronal connections. also known as learning, just at a much faster rate. So I have another question for you guys. Has anyone tried the website Lumosity? Oh, sounded great. There is a challenge called the Stroop test. It's a standard attentional, they use it as a standard attentional studies. You're presented with a word such as orange, but it's actually in the color blue. You're practicing inhibitory control by disregarding what you read and selecting the option of the color, or vice versa. And this was one of the tests we used in my lab. This method uses 2 electrodes, an anode and a cathode that are snugly placed on the appropriate region of the scalp where stimulation is intended. Conversely, you can also run the current in the opposite direction, change the polarity of electrodes, and suppress the action potentials along the path. On the molecular level, TDCS induces plasticity by increasing calcium influx, regulating the excitatory glutamate system. TDCS also decreases inhibitory GABA levels, which usually oppose this glutamatergic plasticity. The increased excitability of the neuron is due to elevated levels of glutamate and calcium in the synaptic cleft. This phenomenon is called synaptic potentiation. There's a large DIY community in the space, as well as over 15 years of research and 4,000 peer-reviewed papers. The third one is gene editing. So for Genetics 101, your nucleus-containing cells hold massive tangles of DNA, the instruction manual that tells your cells what their job is. If any of you remember the movie Jurassic Park, where the dinosaur DNA is extracted from the blood within the mosquito encased in amber, this is unfortunately totally false. Red blood cells do not have a nucleus, therefore no DNA. Sorry to burst the bubble. As time goes on, your cells regenerate. The accuracy of DNA replication is truly astounding. Only one mismatched base pair per 10 billion insertions. However, if occurring in a critical real estate where the sequence is translated to a misshapen protein, disease or cancer can develop. Or if not mutated by air, pH, or toxicity from the environment, we're already predispositioned from our parents to develop a disease. The technology out today focuses on correcting these mutations, creating proteins that patients aren't able to produce through a host organism. Your body reiterates itself piece by piece. You have new skin every 2 to 3 weeks, new skeleton roughly 10 years. You have a new body roughly 7 to 15 years, with neurogenesis a difficult and debatable topic to quantify. Imagine what the implications could be if this process were adjusted to fix repairs as needed. These are just 3 of hundreds of efforts to increase the quality of human life. Many more topics transhumanists focus on include AI, molecular manufacturing, which consists of nanometer scale actuators that manufacture macro-scale products with atomic precision, atomic self-replicating robots, virtual reality, cryonics, mind uploading, cybernetics, space colonization, and many more topics that are as unbelievable as they sound. This is an amazing time to be alive. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming. It was a fascinating time.